Before the temple, before the tribes, before the law itself, there was only a family standing on the drenched earth beneath a broken sky. From their hands rose the first altar, and from their memory, the first craft. For James Anderson, writing in 1723, these were not legends but lineages. Noah and his sons, the first Freemasons, the builders of a new world.
Noah and his 3 sons, all Masons true, brought with them over the flood the traditions and arts of the antediluvians.
But was this a quaint legend, or something more? A radical declaration that Masonry's moral law is older than every creed, older even than the covenant with Abraham. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation from the Quarries, an archive of Masonic law. In 1723, the Reverend James Anderson published a modest-looking volume entitled The Constitutions of the Freemasons. It has been called the founding charter of modern Freemasonry. Yet buried within its pages is a claim so extraordinary that few modern readers pause to consider its implications. Anderson asserted that the craft did not begin with Solomon's Temple or the medieval guilds of builders, but with the patriarch Noah himself. Freemasons, he wrote, were the direct descendants of that righteous man who survived the deluge, the children of Noah. To the 18th century reader, this was not merely a whimsical genealogy. It redefined what Freemasonry was. If Masons were truly Noachidae, then the fraternity's moral code was the first law given to all humanity. The Noachide Covenant, a universal code predating Judaism, Christianity, and Islam alike. Anderson's declaration thus transformed Freemasonry from a Christian confraternity into a moral arc for all peoples, a society bound not by dogma, but by the religion in which all men agree. In this presentation, we will explore how Anderson's Noachite vision reshaped the Masonic narrative, tracing the idea from his 1723 constitutions and their 1738 revisions, through Enlightenment thought and into later Masonic legend. We will see how this audacious claim that the craft began before Abraham gave rise to an ideal that remains at the heart of Freemasonry today: the brotherhood of all humanity under one moral law. When the first book of constitutions appeared in London in 1723, it was presented as a sober historical digest, a polite history of the craft from the beginning of the world. Yet behind its gentlemanly prose lay a work of theological revolution. Anderson's history stretches back far beyond the cathedral builders and stonemasons of medieval Europe. He takes us instead to the mists before the flood, claiming that the true founders of the craft were none other than Noah and his 3 sons.
Noah, the 9th from Seth, was commanded and directed of God to build the great ark, which, though of wood, was certainly fabricated by geometry and according to the rules of masonry.
Here is a striking shift. Earlier, Masonic manuscripts, the so-called Old Charges, spoke of Adam, of Enoch, or of Hermes Trismegistus, preserving the arts of geometry. Noah appears there only as a chronological marker, a date after which Babel was built. Anderson changes everything. He elevates Noah from mere patriarch to master builder, the first speculative mason. The ark itself becomes a moral and architectural prototype, the first great work constructed according to the rules of masonry, the pattern of divine order drawn upon chaos. Anderson's innovation does not end there. He insists that Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were masons true, who brought over the flood the traditions and arts of the antediluvians. In this single phrase, he accomplishes two things. He secures Freemasonry's antiquity, and he makes it universal. For if all nations descend from these three sons, then all mankind is heir to the same sacred art. Masonry, in this vision, is not an English institution, nor even a Christian one. It is humanity's oldest patrimony, older than Babel, older than Abraham, older than the law itself. It is a profoundly inclusive mythology. When the flood recedes and the ark rests upon Ararat, Anderson's Masons step out into a new world where there is as yet no chosen people and no divided faiths, only the common lineage of the children of Noah. In their hands lies the knowledge of geometry, the divine science by which the world was built. Thus, the art of masonry is portrayed not merely as an operative skill, but as a sacred inheritance, a remnant of antediluvian wisdom preserved through cataclysm. Anderson's reframing of Noah as the archetypal mason also implies a subtle theological claim. In his account, Abraham, long held by theologians as the father of true religion, is himself the student of Noahite wisdom. Anderson writes that Abraham learned geometry and the arts that are performed by it from the Chaldeans, descendants of Shem. In this way, the Abrahamic faiths become offshoots of an older, universal revelation, the religion of the patriarchs before the covenant, founded upon the laws given to Noah and known by reason. For Anderson's contemporaries, men of the Royal Society and the early Enlightenment, this was a thrilling and dangerous idea. It suggested that morality and divine truth were not the property of any church, but the birthright of all rational beings. The ark, not the altar, was the symbol of humanity's first covenant. And Freemasonry, by claiming descent from Noah's sons, proclaimed itself the modern custodian of that primordial law. If Anderson's legendary history sought to place Freemasonry before Abraham, his charges sought to place it above sectarian religion altogether. The very first of these charges, concerning God and religion, remains the most consequential text in all of Masonic history. In a few careful sentences, Anderson articulated the theological foundation of speculative Masonry, a foundation at once startlingly inclusive and profoundly moral. He begins,
"A Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law, and if he rightly understands the art, he will never be a stupid atheist, nor an irreligious libertine."
At first glance, this seems unremarkable, a simple affirmation of piety and ethics, but Anderson immediately departs from orthodoxy.
Though in ancient times Masons were charged in every country to be of the religion of that country or nation, whatever it was, yet 'tis now thought more expedient only to oblige them to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves.
This was a revolution in religious thought. In an age when church and state alike demanded confessional allegiance, Anderson declared that within the lodge, all creeds stood on equal footing. The Masons' only religion was that in which all men agree, belief in a divine creator, and obedience to the moral law. Everything else, doctrine, dogma, liturgy, was secondary, even irrelevant. In this simple but radical sentence, Anderson transformed Freemasonry into a moral commonwealth. It was no longer a Christian brotherhood, still less a sect, but what Enlightenment thinkers called a religio naturalis, the universal religion of reason and virtue. It rested on no revelation save that written in the human heart, and required of its initiates no creed but conscience. Here, Anderson's biblical imagery of Noah finds its theological fulfillment. Just as God made a covenant with Noah and his sons after him, a covenant binding upon all humanity, so too did Anderson imagine a Masonic covenant encompassing every faith and every nation, grounded only in the moral law. This law, known to theologians as the lex naturalis, corresponds closely to the 7 Noachide precepts of rabbinic tradition, the laws given to Noah's descendants after the flood. Prohibitions against idolatry, blasphemy, murder, theft, sexual immorality, and cruelty, together with the injunction to establish justice. These, said the rabbis, were binding upon all the children of Noah, meaning every human being. Anderson, as a Presbyterian minister and a scholar of Scripture, surely knew these teachings. By making obedience to the moral law the sole religious obligation of a Mason, he effectively reintroduced the Noachide covenant as the craft's universal creed. To call a Mason a son of Noah was therefore not a poetic flourish. It was a theological declaration. It meant that Masonry stood not upon the Mosaic law of one nation, nor upon the gospel of one church, but upon that primal covenant between God and all mankind. It was, in Anderson's words, the religion in which all men agree, the ancient pre-Abrahamic faith of righteousness and reason. This concept would become the moral cornerstone of Freemasonry and its most enduring challenge to religious exclusivism. It invited men of every creed to meet upon the level, and to recognize, beneath the vestments of belief, their common inheritance as sons of the same patriarch, the survivors of a single universal flood governed by a single universal law. "15 years after the publication of his Book of Constitutions, Anderson returned to his work. The world had changed. Freemasonry had grown beyond all expectation. No longer the quiet society of a few London lodges, but a movement stretching across Britain and Europe. And yet, Anderson remained dissatisfied. He saw the need to anchor this expanding fraternity more securely in sacred antiquity. Thus, in 1738, he published a new edition, revised, expanded, and more assertive in its claims. In this second constitution, Anderson did something remarkable. For the first time, he gave a formal name to his vision of Masonry's primordial lineage. He declared that after the flood,
the offspring of Noah dwelt together in the plain of Shinar as Noachidae, or sons of Noah, which was the first name of Masons, according to some old traditions.
No manuscript or record prior to Anderson mentions such a name. It was, in all probability, his own invention. Yet it was a brilliant invention, one that wove myth, morality, and universality into a single word. By calling Freemasons Noachidae, Anderson did not merely claim antiquity, he claimed universality. For all the human race, he reasoned, are descendants of Noah. The lodge therefore becomes a reenactment of that post-Diluvian family, humanity gathered anew under the moral law. Anderson did not stop there. In revising his charges, he made a subtle but potent alteration to the first line, where the 1723 version had said, "A Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law." The new edition reads,
"A Mason is obliged by his tenure to observe the moral law as a true Noah Keda."
3 small words, but they changed everything. They transformed an ethical maxim into an identity. A Mason was now not simply a moral man. He was a true descendant of the patriarch who first received the universal covenant. In Anderson's eyes, the moral law and the Noahide law were one and the same. This revision gave Masonry a kind of sacred anthropology. All Masons, whatever their nation or creed, were united not by baptism or blood, but by descent from Noah, a descent both literal and symbolic. It was a way of saying, we are one family, bound by one moral inheritance, survivors of the same flood. Later editors were less enthusiastic. When John Entick prepared the constitutions of 1756, he quietly removed the phrase, "as a true Noah Keda," restoring the simpler form. The United Grand Lodge of England has never since reinstated it. Yet the term escaped into the wild and took on a life of its own. Lawrence Dermott, compiling the Ahriman Rezon for the rival Antient Grand Lodge that same year, retained Anderson's phrase with pride. On the continent, entire degrees sprang from it. The Patriarch Noahite in the Scottish Rite, the Royal Ark Mariner in English Masonry, each taking Noah's story as a parable of faith, moral endurance, and rebirth. Through these developments, Anderson's myth achieved its purpose. It offered Freemasonry both a genealogy and a theology, a lineage tracing back to the dawn of the world, and a faith encompassing all peoples. The word Noah Keda became the emblem of that vision, the symbolic surname of every Mason. To call oneself a Noah Keda was to affirm that Freemasonry stood not merely for tolerance, but for an original unity of mankind, long before Babel's confusion or Abraham's covenant. The Lodge, in this light, is a deliberate echo of the Ark, a refuge where the scattered families of earth are gathered once more, not by doctrine or nation, but by the ancient geometry of the moral law. By the mid-18th century, the fraternity that Anderson and Desaguliers had shaped was no longer a curiosity of London's coffee houses. It had become the emblem of a new moral order. A meeting place where men of science, clergy, and nobility could converse as equals beneath the all-seeing eye of reason. To understand why Anderson's Children of Noah resonated so powerfully in that age, we must view it not merely as theology, but as Enlightenment philosophy cast in biblical form. The Noahide idea was, at its heart, an expression of moral universalism, the belief that the law of right and wrong is inscribed in human nature itself, antecedent to all revelation. In rabbinic tradition, the 7 precepts given to Noah formed a minimal code for all nations to honor God, respect life, uphold justice, and abstain from corruption. Anderson's genius was to recognize in this ancient code the perfect emblem of what the 18th century called natural religion, a religion discernible not through scripture alone, but through the reason and conscience shared by all mankind. The men who gathered under the square and compasses were, almost without exception, heirs of the Royal Society and the Newtonian age. For them, The universe itself was a vast temple, governed by number and proportion. To obey the moral law was to build in harmony with that cosmic geometry. When Anderson declared that a Mason is obliged by his tenure to observe the moral law as a true Noachida, he was speaking their language. He was translating revelation into reason, recasting the covenant of Noah as the architecture of the natural world. This alignment between Freemasonry and the Enlightenment's religion of nature did not go unnoticed. In 1738, the same year that Anderson's revised constitutions appeared, Pope Clement XII issued the first papal bull against Freemasonry, In Eminenti Apostolatus. Its charge was precise. The fraternity, by admitting men of all creeds, fostered indifferentism, the heresy that salvation could be found outside the church. Yet Anderson's intent was not to deny faith, but to elevate it. He proposed that beneath the competing doctrines lay a single, immutable law, the moral covenant symbolized by Noah's rainbow. This was the spiritual grammar of the Enlightenment. Philosophers such as John Locke and the deists of the Royal Society spoke of a universal moral order accessible through reason. Anderson's Children of Noah became the Masonic mirror of that idea, a mythic genealogy for the brotherhood of man. Within the lodge, the Catholic and the Presbyterian, the Jew and the Turk could meet as equals because, in Masonic thought, all were bound by the same pre-Abrahamic covenant, the law that God had given to Noah and to all his descendants. In this sense, Anderson's myth functioned as both scripture and manifesto. It provided a sacred pedigree for the Enlightenment's dream of tolerance, a reminder that the light of reason and the law of conscience were not modern inventions, but ancient inheritances carried through the deluge and renewed on Ararat. The arc, the square, and the compass became symbols of that reconciliation. Divine order expressed in human geometry, faith translated into universal reason. Thus, the children of Noah are not merely figures of Masonic legend. They are the archetypes of Enlightenment humanity itself, moral beings united by the same covenant, navigating the floods of ignorance and intolerance within the arc of rational virtue. In Anderson's allegory, as in the philosophy of his age, salvation is achieved not through creed, but through conduct, not through revelation alone, but through the measured harmony of reason, morality, and fraternity. If Anderson's Children of Noah presented the craft as the heir to a primordial covenant, he was not alone in making such claims. Across the intellectual landscape of early modern Europe, a multitude of traditions proclaimed their descent from a single prehistoric wisdom, the Prisca Theologia, the ancient theology said to have been revealed to humanity in the first dawn of consciousness. Hermeticists, Kabbalists, and Rosicrucians alike spoke of a primeval revelation entrusted to patriarchs and sages before the rise of organized religion. Freemasonry, emerging in this same climate, would soon be counted among those heirs. Hermeticism, the Ark and the Pillars. The Hermetic philosophers of the Renaissance revered a legendary figure known as Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes, imagined as an Egyptian priest-sage whose writings contained the purest knowledge of divine science. To scholars such as Marsilio Ficino and Giordano Bruno, the Corpus Hermeticum was not a pagan text, but a fragment of pre-Mosaic revelation, the voice of an ancient wisdom preserved through catastrophe, In the old Masonic charges, predating Anderson, Hermes already makes an appearance as the discoverer of a stone pillar on which the sons of Lamech had engraved the secrets of geometry before the flood. He thus becomes, in effect, the first custodian of the sacred arts. Anderson's elevation of Noah as the great builder instructed by God subtly transposes this Hermetic myth into a biblical key. Both Hermes and Noah serve as vessels of continuity. Each preserves divine knowledge through the cataclysm, one in stone, the other in wood. The ark becomes the spiritual analogue of the Hermetic pillar, a container of wisdom carried safely across the waters of oblivion. Kabbalah, the covenant of the righteous. In the mystical tradition of the Kabbalah, a similar thread is found. Jewish commentators from the Middle Ages onwards taught that God revealed hidden wisdom to the patriarchs before Sinai, to Adam, Enoch, and Noah. The Talmudic doctrine of the 7 laws of Noah, later expanded by Christian Kabbalists such as Noor von Rosenroth and John Toland, was understood as the universal law of righteousness binding all peoples. To the early Enlightenment mind, this Noachide covenant offered an appealing synthesis, a religion of moral law derived from Hebrew mysticism, yet open to all humanity. Anderson's use of the term Noachida parallels precisely this Kabbalistic universalism. His moral law, belief in God and virtue as the only obligations, mirrors the 7 precepts of Noah. In both systems, the righteous of all nations are joined beneath the same divine covenant. The Masonic Lodge thus becomes a kind of Eth HaOlam, an eternal covenantal space where Jew and Gentile alike are symbolically restored to the fellowship of the patriarchs. Rosicrucianism, the brotherhood of the Ark. No movement embodied this vision of a universal brotherhood more dramatically than the Rosicrucian order of the 17th century. In the Fama Fraternitatis of 1614, the mythical founder, Christian Rosenkreutz, travels to the east, gathers the wisdom of ancient sages, and returns to establish a secret fraternity devoted to the reformation of the world. Its members, bound by oaths of secrecy and symbols of transmutation, claim to be heirs of a perennial philosophy uniting the truths of religion, science, and art. Although the Rosicrucian manifestos make no mention of Noah, the parallels with Anderson's Masonry are unmistakable. Both fraternities describe themselves as vessels of ancient light, surviving in secrecy until the appointed age of renewal. The Rosicrucian temple, hidden beneath the earth and illuminated from within, is the esoteric mirror of the Ark, a chamber of preservation amid the deluge of ignorance. Indeed, many 18th century Masonic rites, especially in France and Germany, fused Rosicrucian and Masonic symbolism, speaking of the Noachites and Hieramites as 2 branches of a single initiatory lineage, one descending from the Ark, the other from Solomon's Temple. The unity of the traditions. In this light, Anderson's Children of Noah can be read as Freemasonry's own contribution to the Prisca Theologia. His Noah is a biblical Hermes, a patriarchal adept who bridges revelation and reason. The Ark, like the Hermetic pillars or the Rosicrucian vault, is both a sanctuary and a cipher, a vessel of wisdom that outlasts the ruin of worlds. What Anderson achieved was to transpose this entire esoteric mythos into Protestant respectability. The craft could now claim not the hidden gnosis of Egypt or the Kabbalah of Safed, but the universal covenant of Scripture itself. By recasting the ancient theology as the religion of Noah, a religion of geometry, moral law, and divine order, Anderson placed Freemasonry at the confluence of reason and mysticism. The Ark became the lodge, the flood, the veil of ignorance, and the initiate, the reborn heir of primordial wisdom. In that synthesis lies the enduring fascination of the Noachide myth. It is at once Enlightenment philosophy and Hermetic allegory, an ark afloat between faith and reason. In the end, the story of the children of Noah is not about genealogy at all. It is about preservation. The preservation of truth, of conscience, and of moral order through the tempests of history. Anderson's 1723 constitutions may have clothed this idea in biblical imagery, but the principle it expresses is eternal. That there exists a law older than any nation and higher than any creed. A law that survives every flood of ignorance and superstition because it is written into the very structure of the human spirit. When Anderson called Freemasons the true Nochidae, he was, perhaps without realizing it, giving us a metaphor for the craft itself. The Masonic Lodge is an ark upon the waters, a vessel built according to divine proportion, designed to carry the fragments of a broken world toward a new dawn of understanding. Within it, men of every faith and persuasion embark together, not because they are the same, but because they have chosen to seek the same light. The square and compass are their rudder and sail, the volume of the sacred law their chart, and the moral law their guiding star. Like the ark, the lodge is sealed against the storms without. It is a sanctuary of civility, where the noise of the world subsides and the work of inner construction begins. There, in symbolic form, the ancient covenant of Noah is renewed, that humanity, despite its divisions, can yet live by reason, compassion, and justice. Each brother who passes through its door becomes, in that moment, a symbolic descendant of the patriarch, one who preserves not the arts of geometry alone, but the art of being human. This, then, is the enduring legacy of Anderson's myth. It invites us to see Freemasonry not as a relic of the past, but as a living ark, a vessel of universal morality adrift upon the flood tides of modernity. Its timbers are tolerance, its sail, brotherly love, its compass, truth, and when at last the waters subside and the clouds break, those who have endured within it will step once more upon the dry ground of understanding, carrying forward the same covenant sealed with a rainbow in the ancient sky, the promise that humanity, though often divided, is still one family under God. In that vision, the children of Noah are not figures of legend, but reflections of ourselves. For every Mason who obeys the moral law, who seeks wisdom, and who builds in harmony with the great architect's design, becomes anew a son of the patriarch, as a builder of arks, a preserver of light, and a witness that the ancient covenant yet endures. For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit fromthequarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.